Hello everyone, this is Ankur welcoming all viewers to a very creative session on ethics in which we're going to talk about how to get 70% plus in the level 1. So this video is part of the series called as Closing Bell, wherein we're trying to help the students at the last minute towards the fag end of their preparation to attain maximum marks. So these series is not only for people who are lagging behind, but also who have done their revision and want to check their preparation level. I mean, that's the video series that this particular session is part of. So let's get going with this video on ethics. And it's like a pretty unstructured video which I have tried to put a structure around it. So while in my other subjects I had let's say 10 questions or 5 questions, taking up a question in ethics may not help as much as doing some of the other aspects the way I have decided to go about. So the first of that aspect is how you should particularly attempt in a question from ethics, because ethics as such is not part of your either the tools nor the main job that you would do as an analyst. It is like a supporting activity, and it's being tested very heavily in level 1, and also similarly in level 2 and 3. So and the nature of question is also pretty different. I mean, it's like it's like pretty law oriented, if I may use that word. Now in your curriculum there's only two subjects, FRA and ethics, which are law driven, and FRA also being primarily numerical driven, accounting aspects and all, which is anyways involve numbers. So that leaves only this particular subject, which is primarily a matter of law and rules. So pretty different flavor for an analyst, and therefore the success rate is a bit of challenge here. So my suggestion is going to be the 5 step approach. And obviously this is like not a standard approach, and I don't recommend it that you should leave your particular aspect and the way that you've been doing. But the idea is to give you something which I've seen over a period of 7-8 years, after having taught more than 70% plus batches for level 1. The idea is to give you some kind of a standard and time tested. The very important characteristic is that it's very time tested. I've seen people who've been scoring let's say 50% in mock go above 70% by having this kind of a discipline in place. So that gives me confidence while I speak to an audience like you. So the way I would suggest you got to scan the question first. And why do I say that? You don't start reading that question in a detailed fashion. It is very important that you spend, let's say, 10 seconds, just scan it and try and find out the standard which it has come from. You would know that there are 6 codes and 7 standards, and each standard is pretty much different than the other. So the idea is that before looking at the options and the answers, you should be able to recall the standard which it has come from, and this is not after reading but after scanning. Okay, then what I would suggest is you start reading the case after noting the standard. You start reading the case in detailed fashion, and I as a student used to draw a diagram, because there are too many things. I mean, there is an analyst, there is a form, there is some kind of some case here. So there are a lot of people involved. There is some interrelationship between the two and all that. I mean, I as a student used to get confused sometimes. So the best way to look at that as a diagram. So maybe maybe let's say in 45 seconds I used to create a diagram like that. Because of that, the need to look at the case again used to go down. So therefore, I mean, my diagram used to become a referring point. Then you got to very closely observe the behavior pattern of member and a candidate, because this is again a critical point. Because your codes of ethics and the standards do not apply on anyone who is neither a member nor the candidate. So let's say there are, let's say, 5 people involved. Out of them, only 2 are member or oblique candidates. So I mean, my codes of ethics will apply only on these 2 people. So it is very, very important to look at the behavior pattern only of these 2 people, because you'll have to finally pass the judgment whether these 2 guys have done right or wrong. But the point is that the applicability of law is only upon these two. So it's very, very important that you pay a little more attention to people who are either the member or the candidate here. Okay, so that's the way I used to attempt questions, and this way has worked very well for level 2 also. So not only for level 1, where the case is going to be roughly about 70 words, I mean 50 to 70 words, sometimes in an exceptional case maybe a little shorter, or maybe a little longer, but by and large it's 50 to 70. For level 2 it is about almost like 500 words. It's like a whole 1.5 pages. So this kind of an approach works there very well. So that's the way I would suggest to look at every question. Another very, very critical point is when to attempt ethics in the exam. I mean you have a morning session and you have an evening session. Now, I mean, again, that's purely suggestive, and I have my logics for it. You might have yours. In the first hour, I mean, your mind is just warming up. Okay, you're getting into the groove of that exam. You've been waiting to I mean, we are waiting for that exam day to come, and here it is. I mean, it starts, but your mind is just warming up. I mean, it has still not become very used to that particular chair that you're sitting on, and the huge hall that you're sitting into, etc., etc. So I don't suggest to attempt ethics right up front, because you got to understand that ethics is something that needs not only a good comprehension, but also a lot of common sense at play. Because at the end of the day, if I talk to a lawyer, he's going to say that law is nothing but extension of common sense. Okay, so I would suggest not to start with ethics right up front, neither to do it towards the fag end of your exam, because that's the point where your mind is running too fast, because now the deadline is clearly visible, and mind it that 60 minutes is not too long. So the moment 11 a.m. is going to tick in, your mind will quickly become attuned to just finish the exams up. So in that kind of a speed, I mean, this particular question goes down, and you are more to do with what what you've been able to recall and all that stuff. So not the best way to do ethics. So I would suggest to do ethics in the second hour of the morning session. Okay, and within the second hour, maybe the first 20-30 minutes is what you can kind of devote on ethics. But the afternoon session is a little different, because in afternoon session you have already got in the thick of things by attempting the morning session. So you already know the character of the paper, you already know the color of the questions that are going to come in. So you're absolutely geared up, you're not warming up anymore. So in the 12 to 2 break, you would have relaxed a bit, but I mean honestly, I mean that's hardly a relaxation. So you are absolutely geared up to look at ethics toward this part of the hour. So you try and attempt the ethics in the first hour towards the later half of that. So maybe between 2:30 to 3 is where you can try and attempt ethics. So like I'm again saying, it is purely suggestive. I mean, that's the way I have been recommending to students, and I've seen very good results because of that. I mean, the idea is that you're able to do justice to this particular not so finance oriented kind of a subject. Another question that is being asked is, how much time should we devote? So the simple answer is, on an average, you are given 1.5 minutes per question. Okay, but for ethics you got to maybe can have the budget of 2 minutes per question. So with 15%, you are expecting about 18 questions. So 18 question into 2, 36 minutes. Maybe I would be comfortable even if you are able to finish ethics comfortably in 45 minutes, because there are certain topics in which you would be strong at, and you can save some time from there and devote to ethics. See what I'm a little worried about is ethics not only is very, very non-finance oriented, ethics here is not only very non-finance oriented, it is very strictly tested in the exam. So you score less than 50% in ethics and you are gone. So I really don't want to take the chance, and that 9 minutes of extra grace that I'm being giving here is just because of that particular risk. Okay, so with that I am absolutely good to start some of the confusing points. There was no point of kind of taking up all the 6 codes and all the 7 standards as such, but I wanted to highlight some of the issues. So I have been able to choose 12 such points on the coming 3 pages. With each of these points, I'm sure that you would already have something in your mind to look at, and the idea is that you just listen to me right now and try and absorb as much as possible. The first point here is that your codes are very different than the standards for professional conduct. Now these are some of the things that you got to keep in mind. Your codes are first of all 6 and standard are 7. Second aspect is that your code is the base for the standards to grow. So in our classes, it's like a famous diagram that we make. So if it was a tree and it has got roots and some stems and some branches, so codes is where the roots are, and the standard for professional conduct is where the stem is. So that's the relationship between the two. Also to keep in mind that codes are very subjective. They are mother statements, whereas standards are very pointed and specific. So it is easier to find a violation under a standard because they are very pointed. So read the question very carefully. Okay, the second aspect here is the professional conduct versus the personal conduct. Now this is like a favorite exam point, more so when you're talking about a particular substandard, professionalism, and 1D. So what you got to understand is that the entire program for professional conduct, called as PCP, is basically for professional conduct. It is not for the personal conduct. So you have to very clearly see through as to the behavior pattern that you have to analyze, how much of that portion is someone's personal life. If so, then obviously you don't have to look at application of codes, codes and standards being there. Just a point in case, let's say a person who is an analyst goes to a bar and drink heavily after 8 p.m. after office hours. Now that's something about his personal conduct. That's nothing to do with the professional of investment aspects or capital markets totally. Okay, similarly some of the questions will have, let's say because of some kind of a civil movement, an analyst was sent to jail. Now obviously the civil movement, let's say what is happening in different countries right now, the change of government, etc., has nothing to do with the professional conduct or the behavior as an analyst. You are a citizen of a particular country, and in addition to professional aspects, there are some other aspects also in your life. So be a little careful about the professional versus the personal conduct. Okay, the third and a very famous question that is being asked is as to when should an analyst or a employee decide to leave the organization. Now upfront I want to tell you that it is the last resort. You should not decide to leave the organization right up front. It's really the last resort. So this particular case can be applied to different standards in different aspects. So I'm just going to give you like a thumb rule. So the point is that whenever you it's very commonsensical that you're not going to leave your exam when you are yourself doing something wrong. Okay, so that case is out. Now when you see someone else doing, okay, that someone else, how big is that someone else is the question. If you see one of the colleagues doing something wrong, then you got to report to your own supervisor. You don't have to report to his supervisor, obviously, because he's not going to listen to you. You got to report to your supervisor. If the supervisor doesn't do anything to stop this behavior, you got to take the legal help, the legal counsel. If he also doesn't do anything, and then you get to believe that the entire firm is involved in this wrongdoing, it's only then you decide to leave the organization. Okay, let me give another case. There are about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 teams working in a company, and you are part of this particular team. Now, as a matter of fact, you know that in team B there is something wrong which is happening. So obviously that doesn't mean that you decide to leave the organization right up front, because A, it is not happening in your team, and B, entire firm is not involved. Okay, so if let's say the entire firm is not involved, you got to just dissociate yourself from this activity, so that if tomorrow there is an obligation of a fraud which is which starts on this particular team, then you are safe on that. So you don't leave the organization like that. So you got to report to the supervisor, your own supervisor, and the legal counsel thereafter, and then obviously if you feel that the entire firm, if for example all the projects there is some kind of a wrongdoing which is being happening including yours, in that case is where you tend to leave the organization. So I'm giving you like a thumb rule, and you got to really apply these thumb rules to the cases that are being given in the question. Now my fourth confusing point is the priority of transaction, and here is like a pretty much again like a thumb rule which says that yourself is towards the end. Above you is your employer. Above employer is the client. Above the client is the investment profession oblique capital market. Okay, so just follow that. So if a client is doing some wrongdoing, then obviously in the interest of the capital market you can expose him. If an employer is asking you to do something which is not in favor of the client, you got to still favor the client. Okay, so on and so forth. So that's like a important priority for transaction is we can think about. Then comes a very famous question about the misconduct versus the other standard for professional conduct. Now this particular substandard, which is standard 1D, part of professionalism, is like a very generic standard. Now misconduct, as the name also suggests, is like a very generic word. Misconduct means any conduct which is wrong. Now think about it. Your 7 professional conducts, split into different subparts. I'm just writing the names of the subparts. So 4, 2, 5, 3, 3, 3, 2. So these are like the number of subparts totaling to 22 minus 1, the one which is misconduct. So apart from misconduct, there are 21 specific standards which are there to highlight some of the other wrongdoing. So if I were to apply misconduct, I can apply misconduct on each of these 21, because each of these 21 is in some way a conduct which is wrong. So therefore, whenever the answer to this confusion is, whenever you can find any specific rule getting violated, apply that specific rule, because that's how you should read the law. I mean, in case of law, it's always the specific which is greater than the generic. Whenever there is a tussle, you always follow the specific over generic. Okay, so that's about your misconduct, some of the very important aspect that you got to keep into account. Then is the concept of soft dollars. Now, before beginning this soft dollar, let me tell you that soft dollar was a particular reading in level 2, which is like a pretty detailed set of standards, which has now as a matter of fact being removed, but that's a separate point. So soft dollar is, I can explain by help of a diagram. That's my diagram for you. So you have a client, you have a CFA, which is you right now, and you have a broker. You are executing the client rate through a broker, and the client is reimbursing the brokerage that the broker has to charge from you. So the deal is that you got to take $100 from the client for your advisory and the reimbursement of the brokerage. Now what has happened is that the broker has given some other service to you in particular, which is not going to benefit the client. So rather than you paying to the broker separately, you ask the broker to involve this $3 as part of the brokerage. So the total brokerage becomes 8, and you get it reimbursed from the client. So client effectively pays 108. Out of that, 100 is for the advisory that you've given him, 5 is for the brokerage that the broker has rightfully charged, and 3 for something which the benefit of which hasn't come to the client. So this 3 is what is called as soft dollars. So clearly the soft dollars are not allowed because the benefit of it doesn't reach the client. Okay, so that is part of the loyalty towards the client, that whatever the client pays for, which is 108, the benefit of that has to reach to the person who is paying. So if the benefit is reaching to this CFA, then he got to pay from his pocket. Okay, so the way soft dollars are to be done is very, very careful. And again, like I said, that just make a quick diagram, write some key figures. It took me less than 45 seconds, to pause the screen and make this diagram for you. Coming to the 7th point here, which is like an important aspect, which is fair dealing versus the loyalty to the client. So I am finally under my standard duties to client, standard number 3, and there I'm talking about A versus B. So standard number 3, part A is the loyalty and B is the fair dealing. Now in case of fair dealing, my tussle is between client 1 versus client 2. Here I am not bringing myself or my employer into picture. But while I talk about the loyalty aspect, which is right here, my tussle is between the client 1 versus myself or the employer. My tussle is not between two clients. So that's primarily the differentiating factor between the fair dealing, which is C1 versus C2, and the loyalty, which is C1 versus ourselves. So that's the way you differentiate between the two substandards. A very, very important aspect that you got to keep into mind. Point number 8 talks about a very, very important aspect, which is the difference between the additional compensation versus the referral fees. Now, before we get on to what does each standard has to say, the standard, by standard what I mean is standard 4B and standard 6C. Now you have to understand it very, very carefully. By the word additional compensation here, I mean something that I am being able to get by my hard work. There is no doubt that this is additional over and above what I am getting as as my regular salary or compensation or consulting. So something that I'm getting over and above that. But for that, I need to work, either on Sundays and Saturdays or before or after the working hours, the regular working hours, so to speak. So there is a work that I'm doing. I mean, the actual doing gets into the picture. However, as far as the referral fees is concerned, you have to just pass on the information to another service provider. Okay, so here I am trying to differentiate between the two. So the referral fees, I mean, the best example is of a doctor. So here is a small example that I have drawn, wherein a doctor charges $100 from a patient and refers that patient to a particular chemist who charges $12 from that particular patient. Out of that 12, chemist keeps it and passes 4 back to the doctor. So out of the total 112 that the patient has paid, 100 plus 4, 104 reaches this particular doctor, and it's only the 8 which remains with the chemist. So I'm talking about this 4 at the moment. This 4 is what is referred to as the referral fees. For that, doctor doesn't have to do anything. I mean, in terms of the professional services, all he has done is he has just passed on the information to another service provider called as chemist. The same, the diagram, I can, write it from a financial capital market point of view by writing CFA here as a service provider, a trader as a third party, and the client as a patient. So client, reaches CFA, he charges something for his investment advisory and refers it to a particular trader, and the trader, gives some cash back back to the CFA. So the CFA earns something more than what he is doing, than what he's earning by doing something. So this over and above is called as a referral fees. Okay, so very, very important from an exam standpoint. I also agree to the fact that the two are a little bit similar as well, because both are a top up to their regular fees or the professional charges. So while the additional compensation is over and above his regular salary, your referral fees is over and above the amount that he's charging from the client for his professional services. So there is some kind of a similarity as well. Okay, so I hope that this DNA is clear. Let's look at the last 4 points here, and the ninth point here is the usage of the third party report. Again, a very important aspect. The context here is, let's say the analyst which is writing a particular report uses some other data point. Let's say a third party has created 2-3 graphs, and those graphs are being used by the analyst in his own research report. Now there are two aspects which can go wrong here. The first aspect that can go wrong is the aspect of plagiarism, and that is when the analyst does not write the source of this information. Obviously, the analyst hasn't created those graphs himself, so he has copy pasted it from somewhere. So the first aspect is you got to really mention the source here. But just by writing the source, that doesn't mean that an entire issue has been solved. You got to also be very careful whether the graphs and the relationship that these graphs are talking about, whether that is relevant for your research that you're writing right now. I tell you what happens in a secondary research sometimes. You're looking at a graph which was created in a particular year, and you're trying to create a research, let's say after 4-5 years. Now the relationship that these variables are talking about may be valid for a very old and a dated year, but may not hold true for the year which is right now in relevance. So that said, you might have written the source, but that doesn't mean that you can be absolved from your liability under reasonable care. So there are two aspects that can come up. One is not writing the source. The other aspect is by using a report which is not right now relevant. So the reasonable care, so reasonable stands from reason stands from logic. So the analyst doesn't really apply the logic, whether the graphs that we're talking about, whether they are talking about the right thing or not. So he might have been passed in the plagiarism, but the reasonable care is still violated. So just keep that in mind. Look at the options very carefully. The question is going to test you on options on both of these violations. Okay. Then is the 10th concept, which is again a very important aspect. There are two different aspects when we talk about conflict of interest. The first of that is you get into conflict of interest, and second is you disclose that there is a conflict of interest. What I'm trying to say is your professionalism, independence and objectivity substandard talks about that you should not take any kind of a gift which creates a conflict of interest. Okay, so that means this particular standard is asking us not to get into the conflict of interest situation. Okay, so here I am talking about two very different things. One is the getting into part, and the other one is the disclosure part. Okay, so so the options are to be read in a very careful manner. Let's talk about the 11th point, and that talks about again a conflicting situation. The first is a standard 1A talks about knowledge of the law, which says that you should always follow the stricter law. Okay, but there is another standard, record retention. Now, like I kind of made that diagram, I'm going to extend that further. So here are like your, and here is like your branches. Okay, now note this carefully, that you have codes as the base for everything. You have standards for professional conduct as the main stem. Okay, but here are different branches, and these are the special standards. One of the example is GIPS. Then in level 2 you're going to talk about research objectivity standard. Erstwhile level 2 had used to get soft dollar standards. Now each of these special category of standards also draw their existence from the main stem, which is your standard for professional conduct. What I'm trying to drive home is that GIPS is one of the special standards that draw its relevance from performance presentation itself. So you can't have a scenario where the performance presentation is being okay and GIPS is not being okay. So obviously GIPS is like a specification of something called as the performance presentation itself. Okay, so as such there is no conflict between the two. The performance presentation substandard has been detailed in a formal manner using GIPS. Okay, so with that, I am, towards the close of my session on ethics. So I hope that, this particular series have been of help to you. Well, the endeavor, like I, mentioned at the beginning, is to help the students who are lagging behind to increase their return on effort, so that towards the end they can kind of catch up some of the important aspect, without which, we believe is very dangerous and difficult to go into the exam hall. So those who are lagging behind, it's this case, and those who have done, the entire course, it is important for them to just test themselves, whether their preparation is doing well or not. So one way to test that, is like pretty, robust way, is to check that on the basis of the CFA mock exams. But the other way is to really go through these, top 5 or top 10 or whatever, is a number depending upon the weightage of, the series that we have been created. So, I hope that the session on ethics, which is part of the Closing Bell series from Finstudyclub, is clear and been able to draw benefit out of that. So I wish you all the very best, and I look forward to speak to you on my forthcoming sessions. In the meantime, I hope that you have already looked at, the videos on different aspects, recorded by Amit as well, and the other videos recorded by me. So if you find those on the YouTube channel, we'll be very happy to, have your inputs, your feedback, your queries on the phone numbers or the email IDs that we've given. There are different subject matter experts, so try and reach out to the relevant person, and we'll be more than happy to help. So with these words, I'm good to end. Till then, have a happy round of studying. Thank you.